My name is Thomas Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, watching my own son smirk about my supposed disinheritance. After 40 years of marriage to Christie, the love of my life, her battle with cancer left me heartbroken and alone. Now, as I sat quietly during the will reading, Alexander leaned over to his wife Sophia and whispered something that made her giggle. When our eyes met, he simply said, "You'll get nothing, Dad." Little did he know what was in that envelope the lawyer was about to hand me. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and get comfortable, because this story about family betrayal and unexpected justice is one you won't want to miss. I first met Christie in 1975 at Northwestern University. I was studying literature with dreams of becoming a teacher, while she was blazing through a business degree with honors. We literally bumped into each other at the campus library. I was carrying a stack of books that went flying when we collided. Christie helped me gather them, and I noticed her bright blue eyes and warm smile that could light up a room. Something clicked between us immediately. Our first date was at a small coffee shop just off campus. We talked for hours about our dreams and aspirations. Christie was brilliant and ambitious, with plans to start her own business someday. I was captivated by her determination and vision. She listened intently to my more modest dreams of inspiring young minds through teaching literature. Neither of us cared that our career paths were so different. We married 2 years later in a simple ceremony. We were young and broke, starting our life together in a tiny one-bedroom apartment that barely fit our second-hand furniture. Christie took a job at a local investment firm while I finished my teaching degree. Those early years were financially tight but rich with love and shared dreams. We'd spend weekends exploring free museums, having picnics in the park, and dreaming about our future together. In 1982, Christie spotted an opportunity in the emerging computer software market. She had been saving every penny from her investment job and decided to take a leap of faith. She started her own software consulting company from our small apartment's kitchen table. I supported her completely, taking on extra tutoring jobs to help make ends meet while her business found its footing. The first 2 years were tough. There were nights I'd find Christie still working at 3 a.m, eyes red from staring at spreadsheets, but her determination never wavered. I believed in her completely, brewing her coffee and making sure she remembered to eat during those intense work sessions. Her breakthrough came when she secured a contract with a major banking corporation. Her innovative approach to their software systems caught attention in the industry. Soon, more clients followed. Within 5 years, Christie Software Solutions grew from our kitchen table to a proper office with 20 employees. In 1985, our son Alexander was born. Christie took just 2 weeks off before returning to work, bringing Alexander to the office in a bassinet. I arranged my teaching schedule to care for him when Christie couldn't. We were a team in everything parenting, supporting each other's careers, building our life together. As Alexander grew, so did Christie's company. By the time our son was in elementary school, Christie had expanded to 3 offices across the country with over 200 employees. Her software solutions were revolutionizing how major corporations handled data systems. The financial rewards of her success started flowing in, changing our circumstances dramatically. We moved from our modest apartment to a beautiful house in a good school district. I continued teaching high school English, not because we needed my salary anymore, but because I genuinely loved nurturing young minds. Christie understood this about me, and never once suggested I should stop teaching just because her income had eclipsed mine many times over. We tried to raise Alexander with the same values that had guided us: hard work, compassion, and appreciation for what you have. We took him on camping trips, made him do chores, and encouraged him to pursue his own interests. Christie, despite her busy schedule, never missed his school performances or sports games. I was the dad who coached his Little League team and helped with homework. Christie's business continued its meteoric rise throughout the 90s and early 2000s. By the time Alexander was in high school, Christie Software Solutions had become a major player in the tech industry. The company went public, and Christie's net worth soared into the millions. She was featured in business magazines and invited to speak at major conferences. Through it all, our marriage remained strong. Christie would still bring me coffee in bed before leaving for work, and I'd leave little notes in her briefcase. We never let the growing wealth change the fundamentals of our relationship. Every decision was made together. Every success was celebrated together. Every challenge was faced together. When Christie's health began showing the first worrying signs 10 years ago, we faced that together too. Initial doctor's visits for her persistent fatigue led to more tests, but we tried to maintain our normal life, not wanting to worry Alexander, who was just starting his own career after college. Looking back at those 40 years together, from broke college students to her becoming one of the most successful businesswomen in the country, I cherish every moment. The wealth was never what mattered to me. It was the partnership, the respect, the love that never dimmed, even as everything else in our lives transformed. Christie always said that I was her rock, her constant in a whirlwind life of business deals and corporate expansions. The truth is, we were each other's anchors in this life, which makes what happened later all the more painful to recount. Alexander had every advantage growing up. The best schools, summer programs abroad, private tennis coaches' opportunities Christie and I could only have dreamed of at his age. Yet for many years, he seemed surprisingly grounded. He had Christie's sharp mind and my love of literature. In high school, he volunteered at a literacy program I'd started for underprivileged kids. Christie and I were proud of the young man he was becoming. College changed him somewhat. He attended an Ivy League business school, following in Christie's footsteps rather than mine. I noticed his calls home became less frequent, his visits shorter. We chalked it up to him finding his independence, a natural part of growing up. When Alexander brought Sophia home for Thanksgiving during his senior year, Christie and I were delighted. Sophia was beautiful, articulate, and seemed to make our son happy. She complimented our home effusively, asked Christie insightful questions about her business, and engaged me in a lengthy discussion about classic American literature. After graduation, they married in a lavish ceremony that cost more than Christie and I had spent on our first house. Alexander insisted on the best of everything: a 5-star resort venue, gourmet 7-course dinner, celebrities performing at the reception. Christie and I exchanged glances during the planning process, concerned about the extravagance, but we wanted him to have his perfect day. The changes became more pronounced after the wedding. Alexander took a position at a prestigious investment firm, and Sophia didn't work, focusing instead on their social calendar. They bought a penthouse in the city that they immediately renovated, though it had been recently updated before they purchased it. The first time I noticed something truly concerning was at a family dinner about 6 years ago. Christie mentioned a new charitable foundation she was establishing to provide technology education for underserved communities. Alexander barely looked up from his phone, but Sophia immediately asked, "How much are you putting into that? Wouldn't it be better as a family investment?" Christie explained her passion for the cause, and Sophia nodded politely. But later I overheard her telling Alexander, "That's $3 million that could have been yours someday." Their visits became increasingly centered around money matters. Alexander would casually bring up Christie's business decisions, questioning her choices or suggesting alternatives that would maximize profits rather than align with her ethical business philosophy. Sophia began dropping hints about jewelry or artwork she admired from our home, particularly pieces that had been in Christie's family. One Christmas, Alexander and Sophia arrived in a brand new luxury car. When I admired it, Alexander said, "You could have one too, Dad, if you'd let Mom buy it for you instead of driving that old sedan." I explained that my 10-year-old car ran perfectly well and served my needs. "That's the problem," he replied. "You think too small. Always have." Christie overheard and later that night told me, "Don't let it bother you. He'll mature eventually." But the comments continued and expanded. Alexander began making dismissive remarks about my career choice. "All those years of education just to make a teacher's salary," he said once at a dinner party, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad could have gone into administration at least, made some real money." Sophia began calling me the professor, in a tone that made it sound like a quaint eccentricity rather than a respected profession. The professor still insists on grading papers by hand, she'd tell their friends, as though I were stubbornly refusing to join the modern world. 4 years ago, they started asking Christie for loans to invest in various opportunities. The amounts grew larger each time. Christie consulted with me before agreeing to any of them. Some seemed legitimate, and she would provide the funds as an actual loan with proper documentation. Others seemed suspicious, and she would gently decline. Each time Christie said no, Alexander and Sophia would become temporarily distant. No calls, no visits. Then they would reappear a few weeks later, as though nothing had happened, often with a new request or a different approach. Sophia began calling Christie directly, building what she called a girls' relationship separate from family gatherings. After these calls, Christie would seem troubled, but wouldn't elaborate when I asked what was wrong. I later discovered Sophia had been pumping Christie for information about her will and estate planning, disguised as concern for Christie's legacy. The most painful incident came at Alexander's 35th birthday celebration 3 years ago. Christie and I arrived at the upscale restaurant where Alexander and Sophia were already seated with a group of their friends, none of whom we had met before. As I approached the table, I overheard Alexander telling a story. And then my father said he didn't understand why anyone would pay $500 for a bottle of wine when the $20 one tastes just as good to him. The table erupted in laughter. Alexander hadn't noticed us approaching. "Your dad is so quaint," one of their friends said. "Quaint is one word for it," Alexander replied. "Out of touch is another. Mom's the business genius. Dad just taught high school kids about Shakespeare for 40 years. I froze, feeling Christie's hand tighten on my arm. She cleared her throat loudly, and the table turned to us. Alexander's face flushed briefly before he recovered. "Mom, Dad, come sit down. I was just telling everyone about Dad's famous frugality." The evening continued awkwardly. Christie, ever gracious, engaged with everyone at the table. I tried my best to do the same, but the knife of my son's words twisted deeper each time I caught him exchanging glances with Sophia. On the drive home, Christie was unusually quiet. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry about tonight, Thomas." "It's not your fault," I replied. "I think perhaps it is," she said. "I've given him too much, without making sure he understood the value of things, of people." That night marked a turning point in how Christie interacted with Alexander and Sophia. She became more cautious, less immediately generous. She started taking mysterious meetings with her lawyer, Mr. Jenkins. When I asked about them, she would simply say she was putting things in order. I tried multiple times to rebuild my relationship with Alexander, inviting him to lunch, sending thoughtful messages about articles I thought would interest him. His responses were polite, but brief. Whenever we did meet, Sophia was always present, steering the conversation toward Christie's business or their latest luxury purchase. The last normal family dinner we had was just before Christie's diagnosis. Alexander and Sophia arrived an hour late. Throughout the meal, they barely asked about our lives, instead dominating the conversation with stories about their recent trip to Monaco and the celebrities they'd met. As they were leaving, Alexander hugged Christie warmly, but gave me only a perfunctory handshake. Sophia kissed Christie's cheek and whispered something that made Christie stiffen slightly. After they left, Christie sat heavily on the sofa. "They asked how much I was planning to leave to my alumni foundation," she said quietly. "They suggested it would be better to keep everything in the family." I sat beside her and took her hand. "They're young and materialistic right now. They'll learn eventually." Christie looked at me with sad eyes. "I'm not so sure anymore, Thomas. I'm not so sure." The diagnosis came like a thunderclap on a clear day. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. Christie had been experiencing back pain and fatigue for months, but attributed it to her demanding work schedule and age. By the time the doctors found it, the cancer had already spread to her liver. I remember sitting in the sterile consultation room, holding Christie's hand as the oncologist explained treatment options and prognosis. Christie, ever the pragmatist, asked direct questions about survival rates and quality of life. I could barely speak, my world collapsing around me. In the car afterward, Christie turned to me with determination in her eyes. "I'm going to fight this, Thomas, but I need to be realistic too. We have preparations to make." Christie stepped down as CEO of her company, but remained on the board in an advisory capacity. She began aggressive treatment, surgery followed by chemotherapy and radiation. I took a leave of absence from teaching to be by her side through every appointment, every treatment, every difficult day and night. Alexander and Sophia's response to the news was initially appropriate. They visited the day after the diagnosis, bringing flowers and promises of support. Alexander hugged his mother tightly, tears in his eyes. "We'll get through this, Mom. The best doctors, whatever you need." But as weeks turned into months, their visits became less frequent. Alexander always had a business trip or important meeting. Sophia claimed the hospitals gave her anxiety. Their calls grew shorter, often focused on how Christie was managing her business affairs during her illness rather than her well-being. Meanwhile, I transformed into Christie's caregiver, nurse, advocate, and emotional support. I learned to administer her medications, manage her pain, cook foods that wouldn't aggravate her nausea. I researched her condition obsessively, joining online support groups for cancer caregivers and spouses. Christie's good days became precious gems we treasured. On those days, when her pain was managed and her energy slightly improved, we'd sit in our garden, watching birds at the feeder. Sometimes we'd reminisce about our life together. Other times, we'd simply sit in comfortable silence, holding hands. The bad days were excruciating, watching the strongest person I knew curled in pain, unable to keep even water down. Hearing her cry out in the night, feeling utterly helpless to ease her suffering beyond the medications and comfort I could provide. Christie began having regular meetings with Mr. Jenkins, her longtime lawyer and friend. These meetings were private. Christie insisted on seeing him alone. "Just business matters, Thomas," she'd say. "Nothing for you to worry about." One evening, after a particularly difficult day of treatments, Christie was resting in our bedroom. I brought her tea and found her looking through old family photo albums. "Alexander was such a happy child," she said softly, touching a picture of our son at about 8 years old, grinning widely with a missing front tooth. "Where did we go wrong, Thomas?" I sat beside her on the bed. "We didn't go wrong. He's lost his way a bit, but he's still our son." Christie closed the album. "I've been watching how he and Sophia behave toward you. It's unacceptable." "They're just focused on their own lives," I said, trying to make excuses even though their behavior hurt deeply. "No," Christie said firmly. "It's more than that. It's disrespect and entitlement, and I won't have it." She wouldn't elaborate further, but the next day she asked me to help her to the car for another meeting with Mr. Jenkins. When she returned, she seemed more at peace. 6 months after her diagnosis, Alexander and Sophia finally made time for a proper visit. They stayed for exactly 1 hour. Alexander spent 20 minutes of that hour on a business call in the other room. Sophia spent most of the visit scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up to ask Christie how she was feeling in a tone that suggested obligatory politeness rather than genuine concern. Before leaving, Alexander pulled me aside. "Dad, have you and Mom updated your will? With her condition, it's important to have everything in order." The question felt like a slap. "Your mother is handling her affairs as she sees fit," I replied coldly. He frowned. "I hope you're not letting sentimentality cloud good financial decisions. The estate taxes alone could be a nightmare without proper planning." After they left, Christie asked me what Alexander had said. When I told her, she nodded thoughtfully. "That confirms it," she murmured. "Confirms what?" "Nothing important," she said, squeezing my hand. "Just something I needed to know." The next day, Christie asked me to record a video message. She insisted on doing it when she was having a relatively good day, sitting in her favorite chair in the sunroom. She asked me to set up the camera and then leave her alone for 30 minutes. When I returned, she was tucking a sealed envelope into her robe pocket. "This is for Mr. Jenkins," she said. "Promise me you'll give it to him when the time comes." Of course, I promised, though I had no idea what was in the envelope or what she had recorded. In her final weeks, Christie's condition deteriorated rapidly. The cancer was aggressive, outpacing even the strongest treatments. Alexander and Sophia visited only once during this period, staying just long enough to be seen doing so. The night before Christie passed, she had a moment of clarity amid the medication-induced fog. She beckoned me closer to her hospital bed. "Thomas," she whispered, "I need you to know that I've taken care of everything. Trust the process, even if it seems strange at first." "What do you mean?" I asked. She smiled weakly. "You'll understand when the time comes. Just know that I've always seen everything clearly, including how much you've loved me and how others have treated you." Christie died peacefully the next morning, her hand in mine. In our 40 years together, it was the only time she left me truly alone. The funeral was held at our church, the same one where we'd been married 4 decades earlier. The sanctuary overflowed with people whose lives Christie had touched: employees, business associates, charity partners, former students of mine who had known and loved her. Christie had planned most of the service herself, selecting meaningful readings and music that celebrated life rather than mourning death. Alexander arrived in an expensive black suit, Sophia beside him in designer morning wear that somehow managed to be both appropriate and attention-seeking. Throughout the service, Alexander maintained a solemn expression, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief when he noticed people looking his way. During the eulogy, which I delivered despite my breaking heart, I spoke of Christie's brilliance, kindness, and unwavering integrity. From my place at the pulpit, I could see Alexander checking his watch twice. At the reception afterward, Alexander performed the role of grieving son perfectly for the business associates and family friends. He shared polished anecdotes about his mother's wisdom and spoke of her legacy in carefully practiced phrases. Sophia worked the room like a political spouse, accepting condolences with gracious nods and steering conversations toward how difficult this time was for Alexander. It was Sophia who first broached the subject of Christie's estate, approaching me as I stood alone by the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass like the tears I couldn't seem to shed publicly. "Thomas," she said softly, placing a manicured hand on my arm, "when you're feeling up to it, we should discuss the house and Christie's belongings. Alexander feels it might be too much for you to manage alone." I stared at her, unable to comprehend discussing such matters while the flowers from Christie's funeral were still fresh. "This was my home with Christie for 30 years, I said. "I'm perfectly capable of managing it." Sophia's smile remained fixed. "Of course. We're just concerned about you, all alone in this big place. And there are Christie's collections to consider: the art, the antiques. They should be properly preserved." Before I could respond, she added, "The reading of the will is scheduled for next Thursday. Alexander has already spoken with Mr. Jenkins about the arrangements." I nodded numbly, turning back to the window. I hadn't even known the will reading had been scheduled. The days following the funeral passed in a fog of grief. I moved through our home like a ghost, touching Christie's things, sitting in her chair, sleeping on her side of the bed to feel closer to her. The house that had always been filled with her energy now felt cavernous and empty. Alexander called exactly once during this period. The conversation was brief and focused entirely on whether I had located Christie's important papers and jewelry. "All of her documents are with Mr. Jenkins," I told him, "and her jewelry is safe." "Good," he replied. "Sophia is particularly hoping Mom left her the sapphire necklace. It would mean so much to her." I thought of that necklace, a family heirloom from Christie's grandmother that she wore on special occasions. Christie had always said it would someday go to our granddaughter, if Alexander ever had children. The fact that Sophia had her eyes on it struck me as profoundly inappropriate. A week after the funeral, I received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Jenkins came to the house, carrying his briefcase and a concerned expression. "Thomas," he said after I invited him in, "I wanted to check on you before next week's meeting, and to prepare you somewhat." We sat in the living room, where Mr. Jenkins declined coffee, but accepted a glass of water. "Has Alexander been in contact with you?" he asked carefully. "Barely," I replied, "though he seems very interested in the will reading." Mr. Jenkins nodded, his expression troubled. "I thought as much. Thomas, I've been Christie's lawyer for 25 years, and her friend for longer. What I'm about to tell you isn't strictly professional, but I feel Christie would want me to warn you." He leaned forward. "Alexander has been meeting with me regularly over the past few months, ever since Christie's diagnosis. At first, he claimed he was just concerned about her business affairs, but his questions quickly turned to her estate planning, your rights as her husband, and ways to expedite the transfer of assets." My heart sank. I suspected as much. "Yesterday," Mr. Jenkins continued, "he brought his own lawyer to my office, a specialist in contesting wills. They were quite transparent about their expectations regarding Christie's estate, which are that you will be provided with the minimum required by law, while Alexander will control the bulk of the assets and business interests." Mr. Jenkins's expression was grim. He made comments suggesting you wouldn't know how to manage such wealth appropriately, given your background. The words stung, though they weren't surprising. "And what did you tell him?" "Very little. It's not my place to reveal the contents of Christie's will before the official reading." Mr. Jenkins stood to leave. "I just wanted you to be prepared for what might be a difficult meeting. Alexander seems very confident about the outcome." After he left, I wandered through the house, touching Christie's books, her collection of art glass, the piano she played rarely but beautifully. The thought of Alexander and Sophia inventorying these treasures, assigning dollar values to the physical remnants of our life together, made me feel physically ill. The next morning, Alexander appeared unannounced at the door. He didn't ask how I was doing or offer any words of comfort. Instead, he handed me a document. "What's this?" I asked. "Just a preliminary agreement about Mom's estate. My lawyer thought it might simplify things if we had some matters settled before the official reading." I scanned the document, my teacher's eyes quickly picking out the relevant points. It proposed that I would relinquish any claim to Christie's business interests and investment portfolios in exchange for lifetime residence in the house and a modest monthly stipend. "You want me to sign away my rights before even hearing the will?" I asked, incredulously. Alexander shrugged. "It's a generous offer, Dad. You get to keep living here, and you'll have more monthly income than you ever made teaching. Why complicate things?" I handed the document back to him. "I'll wait for the will reading. Thank you." His expression hardened. "Dad, be reasonable. Mom built that business from nothing. I'm her son, her legacy. You were just along for the ride." The casual cruelty of his words left me speechless. Alexander's tone softened slightly, becoming almost condescending. "Look, I know you're grieving. We all are. But business is business. Mom would want her company and assets managed properly. By you?" I finally found my voice. "Who else? You've never shown any interest or aptitude for business. You'll get nothing from the will anyway. Mom and I discussed it extensively. This agreement is actually more generous than what you're likely to receive otherwise." I stood straighter, summoning Christie's strength. "Then I have nothing to lose by waiting for the official reading, do I?" Alexander's face flushed with anger. He shoved the document back into his expensive briefcase. "Have it your way, but don't say I didn't try to make this easier for everyone." After he left, I sat in Christie's study, surrounded by her books and papers. For the first time since her death, I felt something beyond grief, a slow-burning anger at what our son had become, and a determination to honor whatever wishes Christie had set forth, regardless of Alexander's schemes. The day before the will reading, I found myself unable to sleep. I kept remembering Christie's words. Trust the process, even if it seems strange at first, and her mysterious meetings with Mr. Jenkins. and the sealed envelope and video she had recorded. Whatever was coming, I would face it with the dignity Christie would expect of me. I owed her that much, and more. Thursday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in a suit Christie had always liked, the one I'd worn to our anniversary dinner just a year before. In my pocket, I carried a small photo of Christie from our early days together, her smile radiant and carefree. Mr. Jenkins's office was located in a historic building downtown, his law firm occupying the entire top floor. The conference room had been prepared for the reading, with water, coffee, and a box of tissues discreetly placed on the polished mahogany table. I arrived 15 minutes early, but Alexander and Sophia were already there, speaking in hushed tones with a sharp-featured man I assumed was their lawyer. They fell silent when I entered. Alexander nodded curtly in my direction, while Sophia offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thomas," she said, approaching to air-kiss my cheek, "how are you holding up? You look tired." Before I could respond, Alexander interrupted. "Dad, this is Warren Bradshaw. He's here to make sure everything proceeds appropriately." The lawyer extended his hand. "Mr. Wilson, my condolences on your loss." I shook his hand briefly, noting the cool assessment in his eyes. "Thank you." Mr. Jenkins entered then, accompanied by his associate, a young woman carrying several folders. He greeted everyone professionally, though his handshake was warmer with me than with Alexander's party. "Please, everyone be seated," Mr. Jenkins said, taking his place at the head of the table. "We're here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Christie Eleanor Wilson." Alexander and Sophia sat directly across from me, with their lawyer beside them. I sat alone on my side of the table, feeling Christie's absence like a physical pain. Mr. Jenkins opened a folder and began reading in a formal tone. The first portions of the will were standard legal language, establishing Christie's sound mind and revoking previous wills. Then came specific bequests to various charities and organizations, the Technology Education Foundation she had established, her university alumni fund, the Cancer Research Center where she had received treatment. With each substantial charitable gift, I could see Alexander's jaw tightening, his fingers drumming silently on the table. Sophia maintained a pleasant expression, but her eyes hardened as the donation amounts were read. After the charitable bequests, Mr. Jenkins paused and took a sip of water. Alexander leaned forward slightly, anticipation evident in his posture. This was the moment the disposition of Christie's primary assets, her company shares, investments, and our home. Before proceeding to the remainder of the estate, Mr. Jenkins said, "Mrs. Wilson has left specific instructions for this portion of the reading." He nodded to his associate, who left the room briefly and returned with a television on a rolling stand. Alexander frowned in confusion. "What's this?" he asked. "Mrs. Wilson recorded a video message to be played at this point in the proceedings," Mr. Jenkins explained, inserting a flash drive into the television. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly there was Christie, sitting in her favorite chair in our sunroom. Though clearly ill, she had dressed carefully and applied makeup to soften the ravages of her disease. Her blue eyes, so like Alexander's, were clear and determined. "Hello, everyone," Christie began. "If you're watching this, then I've lost my battle with cancer. I hope my funeral wasn't too dreary. I've always preferred celebrations to mourning. Despite everything, I smiled at this quintessentially Christie statement. I've asked David to play this recording because what I'm about to say needs to come directly from me. Throughout my illness, I've had the opportunity to reflect on my life, my achievements, and most importantly, my relationships." Christie's gaze seemed to focus directly on Alexander. "Alexander, from the moment you were born, you were my pride and joy. Your father and I worked hard to give you every advantage, every opportunity we never had. Thomas taught you compassion and literature. I taught you business and ambition. Or at least, I tried to teach you these things." Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What I've observed over recent years has troubled me deeply. I've watched you and Sophia calculate my worth as if I were a balance sheet rather than your mother. I've seen you dismiss and disrespect your father, one of the finest men I've ever known, because his career didn't generate the wealth that mine did." Sophia's perfect composure slipped, her mouth opening slightly in shock. Alexander's face flushed deep red. "During my illness, this behavior only intensified. While Thomas never left my side, you found every excuse to be elsewhere. Your visits became negotiations. Your concern focused on my assets rather than my comfort." Christie paused, taking a visible breath. "I built my company from nothing, working 18-hour days for years, while maintaining my roles as wife and mother. The wealth that resulted was always a means to an end for me. Security for my family, opportunities to help others, the freedom to solve interesting problems. It was never about status or luxury for its own sake." She leaned forward slightly, her expression intensifying. "Money reveals character, Alexander. It doesn't create it. And what your behavior around my money has revealed about your character has broken my heart." Alexander started to stand, but his lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. "However," Christie continued, "I still have hope that the son we raised is in there somewhere, that with the right motivation, you might remember the values we tried to instill in you." Christie smiled slightly, and I recognized the expression. It was the same look she wore when executing a particularly clever business strategy. "To that end, I've made some decisions about my estate that may surprise you. Mr. Jenkins has a sealed letter with my specific instructions. Thomas, I believe you have something to give to David now." I reached into my inner jacket pocket and withdrew the envelope Christie had entrusted to me. I handed it to Mr. Jenkins, who opened it carefully. "The contents of this envelope supersede any previous versions of my will regarding the disposition of my primary assets," Christie continued from the screen. "David will explain the details, but the essence is this. Thomas will have control of my entire estate, including all shares in Christie Software Solutions and all investment portfolios." Alexander jumped to his feet. "This can't be legal. She was medicated, not in her right mind." "Mr. Wilson, please sit down," Mr. Jenkins said firmly. "I can assure you that Mrs. Wilson was of completely sound mind when she made these decisions. We took extraordinary measures to document her competency, anticipating this very reaction." Sophia grabbed Alexander's arm, forcing him back into his chair, whispering urgently in his ear. On screen, Christie continued. "Alexander, before you begin planning how to contest this will, you should know that I've left extensive documentation of your behavior over the past few years, the financial demands, the disrespect toward your father, the conversations where you and Sophia discussed how you would spend my money after I was gone. My private investigator was quite thorough." My mind reeled. Christie had hired a private investigator? She had never mentioned this to me. "Additionally," Christie went on, "contesting the will triggers a clause that would redirect all contested assets to the charitable foundation, removing them completely from family control. You might want to consider that before proceeding." Alexander's lawyer was furiously taking notes, his expression grave. "However," Christie said, her voice softening slightly, "this arrangement isn't necessarily permanent." The room fell silent as everyone focused on Christie's next words. "Thomas has full discretion over how and when to transfer any assets to you, Alexander. He may do so according to his own judgment of your character and behavior. I trust him completely to be fair, more fair perhaps than you deserve at present." Christie's image smiled sadly. "I hope this comes as a wake-up call, not just another obstacle to overcome. Money isn't love, Alexander. It never was. Your father understands that. I hope someday you will too." She turned her gaze directly to the camera, and I felt as though she were looking straight at me. "Thomas, my love, I'm sorry to leave you with this burden, but of everyone in my life, you're the only one I trust completely. Use your wisdom and your kind heart to guide what happens next." The screen went black, and the room fell into stunned silence. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat and began reading from Christie's letter, detailing the specific legal arrangements. The entire estate valued at approximately $35 million, including the business, investments, properties, and personal effects, was indeed placed under my complete control. There were provisions for how the business should be managed in my absence, charitable commitments to be maintained, and suggestions, not requirements, for how assets might eventually be distributed to Alexander under certain conditions. As Mr. Jenkins read, I watched our son's face cycle through shock, anger, calculation, and finally, a forced calm. Sophia maintained a rigid smile, though her knuckles were white, where she gripped her designer handbag. Their lawyer was whispering urgently to them both. When Mr. Jenkins finished reading, Alexander stood abruptly. "We'll need time to review these documents," he said, his voice tightly controlled. "This is highly irregular and potentially contestable under state law." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Of course, I'll have copies prepared for your legal team. However, as Mrs. Wilson mentioned, contesting any portion activates the diversion clause to the charitable foundation. That provision has been carefully crafted to withstand legal challenges." Alexander turned to me, his expression a mixture of fury and calculation. "Dad, we need to talk privately about this. You can't possibly want to manage all this, the business, the investments. It's not your world." "I think we've talked enough for today," I replied quietly. "I need time to process everything, just as you do." Sophia stepped forward, suddenly all warmth and concern. "Thomas, we're still family. We should work together through this difficult time. Christie wouldn't want discord between us." The invocation of Christie's wishes, after they had so thoroughly disregarded them during her illness, ignited a rare anger in me. "I think Christie made her wishes exceptionally clear," I said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. "Mr. Jenkins, thank you for your handling of this difficult matter. I'll be in touch soon to discuss next steps." Alexander's face hardened into a mask of contempt. "This isn't over," he said quietly, before striding from the room with Sophia and their lawyer hurrying after him. Left alone with Mr. Jenkins, I sank back into my chair, emotionally exhausted. "Did you know what was in that envelope?" I asked. He nodded. "Christie and I worked on it together. She was very clear about what she wanted and why." "The private investigator?" "Her idea. After certain conversations with Alexander and Sophia, she became concerned about their intentions. The evidence gathered was illuminating." I shook my head, trying to absorb everything. "She never told me any of this. She didn't want to add to your burden while you were caring for her," Mr. Jenkins explained gently. "And she knew you would always try to see the best in Alexander, to make excuses for him. She needed to be the one to make these difficult decisions." As I left the office, stepping into the rain-washed afternoon, I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility Christie had placed on my shoulders. But beneath that, I felt something else, a profound gratitude for her final act of love and protection. Even in death, Christie was taking care of me, just as we had always taken care of each other. The fallout from the will reading was immediate and explosive. I had barely arrived home when my phone began ringing. Alexander calling repeatedly, then Sophia, then numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed were their lawyers. I let everything go to voicemail, needing time to process the earthquake that had just shaken our family's foundation. That evening, as I sat in Christie's study reviewing the detailed documents Mr. Jenkins had provided, the doorbell rang insistently. Through the security monitor Christie had installed years ago, I could see Alexander and Sophia standing on the porch, their expressions thunderous. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door but stood firmly in the threshold, not inviting them in. "We need to talk, Dad," Alexander said, attempting to step past me into the house. I held my ground. "I'm not ready for this conversation yet, Alexander." Sophia placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Thomas," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "we understand you're still grieving. We all are. But there are pressing business matters that can't wait. The company needs direction. The company has an excellent management team that Christie put in place," I replied. "Everything can continue running smoothly while I consider the best path forward." Alexander's facade of patience cracked. This is ridiculous. You know nothing about running a tech company. Mom's illness clearly affected her judgment. This will is a mistake that needs to be corrected immediately. Your mother was perfectly sound of mind, I said, my voice hardening, and she made her wishes clear. I intend to honor them. By what? Playing businessman at your age? The board will never accept you. Alexander's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Actually, I countered, I've already spoken with the board chair. Christie discussed her plans with them months ago. They're prepared to work with me and the current CEO during this transition. This was true. Mr. Jenkins had arranged a conference call immediately after the will reading, during which the board expressed their condolences and their support for Christie's wishes. Sophia stepped forward, changing tactics. Thomas, be reasonable. We're not suggesting you get nothing. We can work out a generous arrangement, the house, a substantial allowance, travel, whatever you want. But Alexander is Christie's son and heir. The business should naturally pass to him. That's not what Christie wanted, I said simply. Alexander's control snapped completely. This is all about punishing me, isn't it? She couldn't stand that I built my own life, instead of worshipping at her feet like you did. And now you're continuing her vendetta. The cruelty of his words struck me like physical blows, but I maintained my composure. Alexander, your mother loved you until her last breath. This isn't punishment. It's an opportunity for reflection. Reflection? He spat. I don't need life lessons from a high school teacher who rode his wife's coattails for 40 years. Sophia tugged urgently at his arm. Alexander, this isn't helping, she hissed. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. When you're ready to have a respectful conversation, I'll be here. This isn't over. Alexander threatened as Sophia pulled him toward their car. We'll contest everything. You'll be buried in legal battles for years. I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The encounter confirmed everything Christie had observed about our son's character. The painful truth was that she had been right to structure her will as she had. True to his word, Alexander initiated legal proceedings the very next week. Mr. Jenkins called to inform me that Alexander's lawyers had filed to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, essentially claiming that I had manipulated a mentally compromised Christie into changing her will. Don't worry, Mr. Jenkins assured me. Christie anticipated this move. We have extensive medical documentation of her mental clarity, video recordings of her explaining her decisions, and of course, the evidence from the private investigator. What exactly did the investigator find? I asked, still troubled by this aspect of Christie's planning. Mr. Jenkins hesitated. Are you sure you want to know? It won't be easy to hear. I need to understand what we're dealing with, I insisted. He sighed. The investigator documented numerous instances of Alexander and Sophia discussing Christie's assets and how they planned to control them after her death. There are recordings of them strategizing about how to minimize your share of the estate, mocking your profession and lifestyle, and even discussing selling the house out from under you once Christie was gone. My heart sank at this confirmation of their betrayal. And Christie heard these recordings? Yes, it was difficult for her, but she felt she needed to know the truth to protect you and her legacy. The legal battle that followed was as ugly as it was futile. Alexander's lawyers employed every tactic they could devise, from questioning Christie's mental state to implying improper influence on my part. They deposed everyone from Christie's doctors to her business associates, seeking any crack in the foundation of her final wishes. Throughout this ordeal, I maintained my focus on honoring Christie's legacy. I worked closely with the company's CEO, not attempting to run the business myself, but ensuring Christie's vision and values continued to guide its direction. I met with the charitable foundation she had established, expanding its work in technology education for underserved communities. 2 months into the legal proceedings, Mr. Jenkins requested a meeting. When I arrived at his office, he was smiling for the first time since Christie's death. Alexander's lawyers have requested a settlement conference, he announced. Why? What's changed? The private investigator's evidence has been submitted to the court. Once Alexander's legal team reviewed it, they immediately changed their strategy. They know they can't win, and continuing would only result in more damaging information becoming public. The settlement conference was set for the following week. Alexander and Sophia arrived with their lawyer and a financial advisor. Gone was the open hostility, replaced by a cold professionalism that was almost more disturbing. Their proposal was straightforward. They would drop all legal challenges in exchange for immediate transfer of 20% of Christie's company shares to Alexander, with a 5-year plan for transferring the remaining business interests. Mr. Jenkins and I listened to their presentation without comment. When they finished, I asked for a moment alone with my son and daughter-in-law. Their lawyer looked uncomfortable, but complied after Alexander nodded. Once we were alone, I spoke from my heart. Alexander, your mother built her company with certain values at its core: innovation, yes, but also integrity and social responsibility. Before I consider any transfer of her legacy, I need to know that those values will be upheld. Alexander's expression remained calculated. Of course, I understand the company's brand image is important. This isn't about brand image, I countered. It's about honoring what Christie stood for. Sophia interjected smoothly. Thomas, we all want the same thing for Christie's legacy to continue. Alexander is her son, her natural heir. He has her business acumen and vision. I studied them both, seeing the polished performance for what it was. What you're missing is her heart, I said finally. And until I see evidence that you understand what truly mattered to her, I can't in good conscience transfer control of what she built. Alexander's mask slipped slightly. So what exactly do you want from us? Some performative charity work? Volunteering at a soup kitchen? What's the price tag on your approval? His cynical response told me everything I needed to know. This meeting is over, I said, standing. Mr. Jenkins will inform your legal team of our decision to reject your proposal. You can't run from this forever, Dad, Alexander called as I walked toward the door. You're 70 years old. What's your endgame here? I turned back, meeting his gaze directly. My endgame, as you call it, is to honor your mother's wishes, both the letter and the spirit. She believed you capable of growth, of becoming the man we raised you to be. I still hold out hope that she was right. The legal challenges were formally withdrawn the following week. The evidence from the private investigator had proven too damning to risk public exposure in court. Alexander and Sophia retreated to lick their wounds, and I suspected to reformulate their strategy. For several months, there was silence from them. I continued working with Christie's company, establishing a scholarship program in her name, and slowly finding my footing in this new reality she had created for me. Then, on what would have been our 41st wedding anniversary, a large floral arrangement arrived at the house. The card read simply, "We should talk. No lawyers, no demands, just family." Alexander and Sophia. After considerable thought, I agreed to meet them for dinner at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant downtown. I arrived early, selecting a table in the corner where we could speak privately. Alexander and Sophia entered precisely on time, both dressed more conservatively than their usual flashy style. As they approached the table, I noticed something different about their demeanor, a subdued quality I hadn't seen before. The initial conversation was awkward but civil. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather, the restaurant, inconsequential matters. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat. "Dad, I've been doing some thinking over these past months. About Mom, about our relationship, about the kind of person I've become." I listened carefully, searching for authenticity in his words. "The things that investigator recorded, the things Sophia and I said about you and Mom, I can't defend them. They were cruel and callous." He paused. "And they weren't isolated incidents. That's who I've been for a long time now." Sophia nodded, her eyes downcast. "We were obsessed with status and money. We treated Christie like a bank, and you like an obstacle. It's shameful when I look back on it. I wanted to believe them. Part of me, the teacher who had always looked for the best in his students, the father who remembered the sweet boy Alexander, had once been desperately wanted this change of heart to be genuine. What brought about this reflection? I asked carefully. Alexander exchanged glances with Sophia. Honestly, first it was anger and resentment. But then I had to face the recordings, hear my own voice saying those terrible things. It forced me to see myself through Mom's eyes, through your eyes. I didn't like what I saw. We've started therapy, Sophia added, both couples and individual. It's been eye-opening. We're not asking for anything, Dad, Alexander continued. Not the company, not money, nothing. We just want a chance to rebuild some kind of relationship, if that's even possible now. I studied them both, weighing their words against their past actions. It won't be easy, I said finally. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair. We know, Alexander said, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. But we'd like to try, if you're willing. As we continued our cautious conversation through dinner, I remained watchful for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Yet something had indeed changed in them. Whether it would last remained to be seen, but Christie had been right. There was still hope for the son we had raised. After dinner, as we prepared to part ways, Alexander asked hesitantly, would it be all right if we came by the house sometime? Just to talk, get to know each other again? I thought about Christie, about what she would want. Yes, I said finally. I think your mother would like that. 1 year after Christie's passing, I stood in the garden she had loved so much, watching the spring bulbs she had planted push through the warming soil. The year had been one of profound transformation for me, for Alexander and Sophia, for Christie's legacy. The tentative reconciliation that began over that dinner continued, with cautious steps toward rebuilding trust. I invited Alexander and Sophia for Sunday dinners, initially once a month, then more frequently as our comfort with each other grew. Our conversations gradually became more authentic, less guarded. 3 months into this new chapter, Alexander made a confession that surprised me. Dad, I've left the investment firm, he said, as we sat on the patio one evening. The culture there was toxic, all about status and money. It was feeding the worst parts of me. What will you do now? I asked. I'm not sure yet. For the first time in my adult life, I'm taking time to figure out what actually matters to me, not just what impresses other people. Sophia nodded. We've downsized too. Sold the penthouse, moved to a smaller place. It's been liberating, actually. Their transformation wasn't instant or perfect. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns emerged. But there was also genuine effort, and increasingly, glimpses of the values Christie and I had tried to instill in our son. As they worked on themselves, I focused on honoring Christie's legacy. With Mr. Jenkins's guidance, I established the Christie Wilson Foundation, consolidating and expanding her charitable initiatives. The foundation focused on 3 areas Christie had cared deeply about: technology education for underserved communities, cancer research, and support for caregivers of terminally ill patients. 6 months after our reconciliation began, I invited Alexander to join one of the foundation's committees, not as a leader or decision-maker, but as a regular member working alongside educators and community organizers. To my surprise, he accepted without hesitation and threw himself into the work with unexpected enthusiasm. I'm learning so much from these people, Dad, he told me after one committee meeting. They accomplish amazing things with limited resources. It makes me ashamed of how I used to throw money around on meaningless status symbols. Sophia, too, found a new direction. She began volunteering at the cancer center where Christie had received treatment, offering companionship to patients undergoing chemotherapy. The woman who had once avoided hospitals because they gave her anxiety now spent 3 days a week sitting with strangers during their most vulnerable moments. As for Christie's company, I worked closely with the CEO and board to maintain her vision while planning for the future. I made it clear from the beginning that I was a steward, not an executive. My role was to ensure the company remained true to Christie's values, while continuing to innovate and grow. 9 months after Christie's passing, I had a significant conversation with Alexander about the company. We were walking through the park Christie and I had frequented during her better days. "I've been thinking about Mom's business," Alexander said carefully. "I understand now why she didn't want to hand it over to me immediately. I wasn't ready, not in terms of business acumen, but in terms of values and character." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I don't expect anything, Dad, but I would like to learn more about the company she built, not to take control, but to understand her legacy better." After considerable thought, I arranged for Alexander to work with different departments within Christie Software Solutions, starting from entry-level positions. No special treatment, no executive fast track, just honest work and the opportunity to understand the company from the ground up. To his credit, Alexander embraced this approach. He worked alongside programmers, sat in on customer service calls, joined marketing teams for product launches. He brought his business education and experience, but also a new humility and willingness to learn. The company executives were initially skeptical, but gradually came to respect his commitment and growing understanding of Christie's vision. Several mentioned to me privately that they could see Christie's intelligence in him, and increasingly, her integrity as well. On the anniversary of Christie's death, I organized a small memorial gathering in our garden. Just a few close friends, Mr. Jenkins, and of course, Alexander and Sophia. We shared memories of Christie, celebrating her life rather than mourning her absence. After our guests departed, Alexander, Sophia, and I remained in the garden as twilight descended. "Dad," Alexander said quietly, "I want to thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." "Your mother never gave up on you either," I replied. "That's why she structured her will the way she did. Not to punish you, but to give you an opportunity to find your way back to the values we raised you with. She was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else," he said with a sad smile. "I just wish I could tell her I finally understand what she was trying to teach me." "I think she knows," I said, looking up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. In the days following the memorial, I made a significant decision about Christie's estate. After consulting with Mr. Jenkins, I established a 10-year plan for transitioning company leadership. Alexander would continue learning all aspects of the business, gradually taking on more responsibility as he demonstrated his commitment to Christie's vision and values. The plan included specific benchmarks related not just to business performance, but to ethical leadership and social responsibility. The company would remain private, with a portion of shares transferred to the Christie Wilson Foundation to ensure its charitable work would continue in perpetuity. When I presented this plan to Alexander, he listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the governance structures and accountability measures. "This seems fair," he said when I finished explaining. "More than fair, actually. I still have a lot to prove, to myself as much as to anyone else." "Your mother believed in second chances," I told him. "So do I." The relationship between us continued to heal, not perfectly but genuinely. Alexander and Sophia began joining me for holidays and regular family dinners. We established new traditions while honoring memories of Christie. Gradually, we rebuilt a family connection based on something more meaningful than financial expectations. As for me, Christie's unexpected estate plan gave me not just financial security, but purpose during a time when I might otherwise have been lost in grief. The foundation work connected me with remarkable people, dedicated to causes Christie had championed. I found myself learning new skills, exploring new interests, building a life that honored Christie while allowing me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. In quiet moments, I still felt Christie's absence acutely. I missed her laugh, her brilliant mind, her steady presence beside me, but I also felt her wisdom guiding me, her love sustaining me. She had prepared me for this chapter with characteristic foresight and care. One evening, as I sat in our garden watching the sunset, something Christie and I had done countless times together, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The pain of loss would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into something else. A deep gratitude for the life we had shared and the legacy that continued. Christie had been right, as she so often was. True wealth had nothing to do with money or status. It was measured in love, integrity, and the positive impact we have on others' lives. By that measure, Christie had been the richest person I'd ever known, and in ensuring her material wealth would support those values, she had left behind a legacy far more valuable than any financial inheritance. What would you do if faced with a similar situation in your family? Have you ever experienced a betrayal that later led to healing and growth? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most challenging and ultimately redemptive chapters of my life. Remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't measured in dollars, but in lessons and love.